This is part 3 for chapter 17. We'll finish talking about logos and then go into ethos, pathos, and mythos as well. So when I say the word arguments, what do you think of? You might be thinking that it's a dispute or some type of a confrontation between a couple of people. But when speaking about persuasion, we define an argument as a claim supported by evidence and reasoning for or against that claim. For example, if I say that the Latino Heritage Club should be given more funds next year, there's no argument because there's no evidence or reason supporting that statement. So to turn that statement into an argument, you'd want to say the Latino Heritage Club should be given more funds next year because it has doubled in size, and without an increase in funding, it can't provide its members the same number of programs. So the statement includes the claim supported by evidence and reasoning. So the types of logical arguments. These are proving your conclusions from the reasons and the evidence. So if you argue by sign, that's supporting a claim by citing information that signals that claim. Arguing by example, pretty much just what it sounds like, that you support a claim by providing one or more individual examples. You want to make sure that you have enough instances or examples cited so that listeners understand that you're not just picking, one out of the blue. Make sure that your examples are typical and representative. Then you can argue from analogy. This is where you support a claim with a comparable example that's very similar to the subject of the claim. You want to make sure that the subjects being compared are similar in the important ways, and that you need to know if any of the ways in which the subjects are dissimilar, is that important to your conclusion? And then finally, arguing from causation. This is supporting a claim by citing events that have occurred to bring about your claim. You need to know if those events alone are sufficient enough to cause the stated effect, and if other events around that accompany the cited events, did they actually cause the effect? So you need to be careful there. Okay, now let's talk about reasoning fallacies. Reasoning or logical fallacies. That's a flaw in reasoning. Think of them like a trick or an illusion of thought. And they can be used by politicians and by the media to fool people. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of these logical or reasoning fallacies. And here are 5 that the book talks about. A hasty generalization is when there really isn't very much evidence, or you might only have like one really weak example. For example, everyone who breathes secondhand smoke will develop lung cancer. Well, that is, first of all, it's not true, right? But that's an example of a hasty generalization. Okay, a false cause, where you try to link two things together, but the cause is false. An example, John tried cigarettes and flunked out of school. Well, he may have flunked out of school, but I doubt that he flunked out of school because he tried cigarettes. So there's a false cause there. An either or fallacy, an example of this is either we ban smoking indoors or kids will die. Well, you can't logically link those two together. A straw man fallacy is where you weaken the opposite position and you misrepresent it in some way, and then you attack that weaker position. So, for example, if you support smoking indoors, you support killing kids. Well, that's a straw man. And then an ad hominem fallacy attacks the person making the argument rather than addressing the argument itself. So an example here would be anyone who smokes is stupid and doesn't care about kids. Okay, I mentioned that there were dozens, if not hundreds, of these reasoning or logical fallacies. At the bottom of the slide, you can see this website, yourfallacy.is. And if you go there, they've got this interactive site where you can click on it. They can explain what that fallacy is. It's very interesting to go through, so I encourage you to go out and take a look at it. Now let's talk about ethos, speaker credibility. And there are basically three things that come to mind when you're talking about speaker credibility. First is competence. So when you are speaking, you want to explain your competence. Explain that what your experience is, what your background is. Explain the research that you've done. And make sure that your nonverbal communication is consistent. You want to appear confident. You need to have a good character. You need to reduce that psychological distance between you and the audience. You might use some humor. You might tell a touching story to begin. But you want to garner goodwill from the audience. And then charisma. This is a little harder to define, but you need to make sure that you are coming across as likable and knowledgeable, and that combined with your character and competence all goes towards speaker credibility. Now, your book also lists other terms. So you've got initial credibility, and that's when you begin your speech. So you have some credibility because you were asked to speak for whatever reason. You were asked to come speak, so you have some credibility. Then as you are speaking, you will gain derived credibility from what you're saying. People are nodding along with you, they agree with you, or you're providing some new information. And finally, you have terminal credibility. And that's your credibility at the end of your persuasive speech. And that, of course, should be higher than your initial credibility. So make sure that you're using evidence from respected sources, use your nonverbal messages to enhance your credibility, and use your vocal expression to enhance your credibility. Okay, pathos is using emotional proof. Now you can evoke negative emotions. And in negative emotions might be fear or guilt or shame, anger, sadness. And this can be a very, very powerful way to get your message across. So if you plan to evoke negative emotions, what you need to do is really scare the heck out of your audience. Describe the dangers in a lot of detail and do not beat around the bush. Be explicit. But then you have to discuss solutions as well as problems. You want to offer your audience hope. Emphasize the cost of not taking action as well as all the good things that will come, the benefits of taking action. And make sure that what scares you also scares your audience. You really need to know your audience, consider the values and the needs of your audience when you're thinking about what might frighten them. And then another way to use pathos is to evoke positive emotions. You might want to evoke joy or pride. If you're trying to get someone to vote, for example, you want them to feel a lot of pride as an American citizen in a democracy. So evoke that sense of pride. Could be relief or hope or compassion. But those are all ways to use emotional proof. And then finally, we have mythos or narrative proof. So mythos is about using stories and narratives to get your message across. And mythos can really connect your message with your audience's social and cultural identity. And it gives them a reason to listen carefully to your ideas. So if you can tell a story that they connect to, that's using mythos. And we see that storytelling. You see that in religions, that they use and teach values through parables. Okay, mythos, using narrative proof. All right, now one of the things that I want to point out is that when you approach your persuasive speech, don't think about using one or the other of these proofs. You probably want to use logos and pathos and ethos and mythos if you're going to tell a story in your persuasive remarks. But you use them all. You might choose a primary one, but if you're just putting logical arguments out there, yes, it could be effective. But think about how much more effective it could be if you brought emotion into it along with your logical arguments. So make sure that you consider all of those types of logical proofs, or sorry, all those types of persuasive proofs when you're making your arguments. And that is the end of part 3 for chapter 17.